Good evening and a good chodesh, even though it's not sundown yet in Montana, but for many of you on the East Coast, it's already Rosh Chodesh, the first of two days of Rosh Chodesh for the month of Iyar. We left off before Pesach with a discussion about the garb, the hugging of a king, and whether the king is wearing his clothing or not, and whether that's really important or not as it relates to having a bond with a king. And so, even though in chapter 4 we were talking about the general bond of a Jew with God via the study of Torah and the observance of Mitzvos, in chapter 5 we're going to delve deeper into the specifics and sort of differentiate between the study of Torah and doing Mitzvos and which one has a deeper bond, which one has a more intense connection. And we're not going to finish chapter 5 today, but we're definitely going to get into the Torah side of it, not the mitzvah side of it, but the Torah side of it. You know, it's in a world of distractions, in a world where people have a hard time delving or contemplating one topic for more than 3 seconds without getting distracted. Everything we're about to say is going to sound a lot harder than it really needs to be. But if we take our Torah study seriously, and have the opportunity to put away our phones and go to a quiet place, either it's after the kids go to sleep or before they wake up, or to go to a shtibel in a corner in a shul somewhere. The point is that if we are to delve and spend time studying Torah without distractions, without interruptions, we have the ability to accomplish something that is simply impossible in every other reality of our life. So let's see it inside. Chapter 5, Parak Hey. Let's clarify in more depth the term from the Tikkunei Zohar, the term that was said, which Elijah says, it quoted in the Zohar, Leis machshava tfisa v'chulu, which is a term thrown around a lot in Kabbalah and Chassidus. No thought can grasp you. That's the term, Leis machshava tfisa v'ch, that when it comes to God, no thought can grasp you. Now, when you understand anything, whatever the topic may be, Jewish or non-Jewish, Torah or non-Torah, you own it, and it becomes absorbed in your mind. So then what does it mean, grasping versus owning it, versus knowing it? So the Alter Rebbe is explaining the meaning of Eliyahu in the Zohar. Hine kol seichel k'shemaskelu masik b'sichloi is a muskel. When your mind processes and masters an idea, any idea, your mind initially grasps the basic point of the idea, engulfing it mentally, meaning in your brain it's fully engulfed. When you understand something, your mind absorbs it and engulfs it, sort of like a sponge soaking up a puddle of water. You're absorbing everything, the entire intellectual idea that your brain is thinking of, you are absorbing. Now, in the beginning stage of it, you're engulfing it, you're absorbing the basic idea, but now you have the basic idea in your head, now you want to master it. You want to really understand it. You want to understand the inner logic. You want to understand the broader implications. What does this actually mean? How does it play out? Now that it's fully analyzed, it's not only engulfed, but it's grasped. And that's when it says in the Zohar that when it comes to God, leis machshava tfisa bach, there's no tfisa, there's no grasping when it comes to God. Because grasping would mean that you fully analyzed it, you fully mastered it, and you fully got it. Can that really be possible with God? He says further, and after that, after you fully analyze the idea in your head, in your mind, the idea becomes fully grasped, engulfed, and absorbed in your mind, that figured the idea out and mastered it. So now your mind, the idea is fully engulfed and grasped in your mind. But it goes even further. But there's yet another dimension, right, to the experience, and that is during the interim time when your mind is processing the initial idea, trying to grasp it, then it's the opposite. What's the opposite? And that your mind that is absorbed in the idea. Not the idea is absorbed in your mind, but your mind is absorbed in the idea. So basically, in andere Werte, as we say in Yiddish, in other words, until you master an idea, it's still captivating to you. Means you are absorbed in the idea. Not the idea is absorbed in you. You are absorbed in the idea because you're trying to captivate it. You're trying to master it. But as soon as you fully master it, as soon as you understand the idea, you fully understand it from every different direction. You understand the broader implications. You understand the inner logic. At that point, it's not captivating anymore because you got it already. You absorb the idea. So at that point, the idea is absorbed in you. This is the way the Rebbe explains this pshat, this little line in Tanya. So when you study an idea from the Torah, and Torah we know already from chapter 4, Torah is one with God, then you have this incredible, extremely unique, intimate oneness with Hashem. Now you are absorbed in God, and He's absorbed in you, kiviyachol, metaphorically. Now think about that. You sit down on a quiet Tuesday or a Friday night after the kids go to sleep. You take out a Gemara, you take out a Shulchan Aruch, you take out a Maimer Chassidus, and actually I'm going to talk soon about the difference between whether you're learning Chassidus and Kabbalah versus learning Halacha as it relates to this oneness, because this perhaps may be the one place you'll hear from me the power of learning Halacha that has something that Chassidus could never give you. But imagine sitting down and learning, and as you're learning, those moments where you are fully engrossed and engulfed in the understanding and the mastering of this godly idea that's in the Torah. So first, in the first part of it, you are absorbed in the idea, trying to grasp it and it's still captivating to you. And then when you fully internalize it to the best that the human brain can, at that point, you are not absorbed in the idea, but the idea is absorbed in you. And what that means in simple English for people like me and you is that you are one with the idea. And he gives an example, Derech Mashal, by way of illustration. When you are in the process of analyzing and fully mastering a ruling in the Mishnah or the Gemara and the Talmud. So you're sitting down to learn a halacha, a law regarding Chesed Mishpat. You're trying to figure out the laws of giving loans in Judaism. Or you're sitting down to learn halacha in Yeridea. Or you're learning now, I happen to be learning right now Masechta Sanhedrin. You're sitting down and you're learning the halachas in Masechta Sanhedrin. At that moment, when you are fully mastering and analyzing this idea from Torah, your intellect grasps and engulfs the halacha, and at the same time, your mind is absorbed in it. So your mind is absorbed in the idea is absorbed in your mind. You have a oneness that is transpiring within yourself, which is why it's so important. You always wonder why there's halachas in Judaism about interrupting Torah study. Right? It says about Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, very unique, but that Teirasu Yumnasai, his entire life was Torah. And therefore there was a question and there's a discussion about whether he needed to stop or not to daven, to pray. Because how could you stop someone in the middle of such a union? Now, we're not there. We're nowhere even close. But the idea that when you're studying Torah properly and it's engulfing your mind and your mind's engulfed in it, and at that moment you are one with the Torah, which is God, because we already discussed in chapter 4 that that God and the Torah is one. Why would you ever interrupt that? It's not just interrupting the study. You're interrupting the union. It's intimacy. You should never interrupt intimacy. So he says, this ruling of the halacha that you see in the Talmud or in the Shulchan Aruch, represents the wisdom and will of the Blessed Holy One. That it arose in the will of God, that if Reuven will present a particular legal argument, and Shimon, and Shimon will give a certain counter argument, Then the ruling of God, God's will, is that the ruling should be so and so. So you're sitting and learning that Abaye says this, or Beis Shammai, that Abaye says this and Rava says this, or that Beis Shammai says this and Beis Hillel says that. You're looking, okay, there's two opinions, but it's more than that. Those two opinions are all part of Torah. And the halacha is, whatever the halacha is, that is the divine wisdom and will that's being incorporated, being engulfed in your mind and captivating and eventually becoming into this intimate union. So when you're studying a theoretical idea, so you could say this, A plus B equals C. Is that the same as 1 plus 1 equals 2? Perhaps. On a higher level, you're getting to the core of it. So these are discussions in the realm of math. But Torah is much different. And we're going to talk about in a minute why Torah is different than any other logic, any other intellect in the world, any other philosophy in the world. Torah is at a different level. But when you learn a halacha, when you spend time engulfed in a understanding a halacha, you take out a Shulchan Aruch, what does the Beis Yosef say, and what does the Ramah say, and what does the Shach say, and what does the Taz say, and what does it say in the Double Mervava, and what does it say in Eshel Avram, and you go, and then the Alter Rebbe, how does he rule in Shulchan Aruch according to him versus the Mishnah Brura? Your mind is engulfed and one in an intimate union with the divine will and wisdom. There is no such thing on planet Earth, not even a mitzvah. Because at the end of the day, a mitzvah is a physical action. And there's no way a physical action could have the same type of union as a divine thing that's going on as your mind is engulfed and engulfing the wisdom of God. What about if you're studying a part of halacha that isn't relevant, that will never be, right? There's certain parts of Jewish law that will never exist. We know that. Like certain laws about Irani Dachas, about a city that's condemned to destroy for idolatry. So what's the point? I'm learning something. You're telling me it's God's divine wisdom and will, but it never happened, never will happen. So what happens when I learn that stuff? I get it, Rabbi. I get it. The Alter Rebbe, when you learn a halacha about how to get up in the morning and wash negelas or wash your hands or how to do the morning prayers or how to put up a mezuzah, I get it. It makes sense. But you're telling me that I'm learning a part of Judaism that doesn't seem relevant because it isn't necessarily ever going to happen or necessarily will never happen, and it's still considered connecting intimately with the divine, says the Alter Rebbe. By the way, it is interesting that he uses the example of Reuven and Shimon, right? He says, if Reuven says this and gives an argument, then Shimon gives a counter argument. Why Reuven and Shimon? Because if you look in the book of Genesis, in the book of Bereshis, the first two arguments, the first two behaviors that were questionable was Reuven and Shimon. First, Shimon told Levi that here's the dreamer's coming. He was talking about Joseph, our brother, the young brother, the dreamer's coming. Let's kill him. And then Reuven came and said, let's not kill him. Let's put him in a pit. So that perhaps, I saw in one of the commentaries that perhaps the reason the Alter Rebbe uses the name Reuven and Shimon is not just because they were the first two tribes of Israel, but because biblically they were the first two ones to have arguments and counter-arguments. Right? Shimon said the argument, Reuven said the counter-argument. It makes perfect sense. But now let's get to the core of it. What happens when you're learning a halacha that isn't necessarily ever going to happen? It says the Alter Rebbe, and even if the scenario never came to pass and never will, and there will never be actual litigation involving this particular arguments and claims. Since this arose in the will and wisdom of Hashem, of the Blessed One and Holy be He, that in other words, that Hashem gave the ruling, that what the final ruling would be if one person would present a certain legal argument and another person a corresponding counter argument. It follows that when you understand this ruling with your mind, as the law prescribed in the Mishnah, the Gemara, and the later authorities, you thereby understand, grasp, and engulf with your mind the wisdom and will of the Blessed One. So often we get caught up. I don't agree with that halacha. I don't like that halacha. I wish the halacha would have been like Beishamai versus Beisil. I wish the halacha would have been like Rabbah, not like Rabbi Yosef, or vice versa. I wish Ashkenazim would rule like the Beis Yosef. I saw today, somebody said, he says, the Sfardim, they eat rice on Pesach. They have all their special leniency. He says that's why they have to have slichas for a whole month before Rosh Hashanah to ask God for forgiveness for all their sins. He said so jokingly. Sfardim have 100% permission to do what they do. But when you learn a halacha, it's not just about an argument with two different opinions. It's so much more than that. It's the ability to tap into, but not just tap into, but to contemplate, to grasp, to be captivated by, and eventually to master the divine will and wisdom in your mind. So when you know the halacha, the pride, the happiness should not be that you know the halacha. The primary happiness should be that you have an intimate bond with Hashem. It says in Tehillim, "Bikudei Hashem yisharim mesamchei lev," that the commandments of God are upright, and mesamchei lev, they bring joy to the heart. Most people look at that. What do you mean brings joy to my heart? The commandments bring joy to your heart. When you're searching for chametz, when you're trying to daven on a plane because the zman tefillah was the time for davening was too early. When you left, it was too early. You have to daven on a plane full of Gentiles. Is it when it's a 3-day yontif? On Tisha B'Av, when are you supposed to have the joy from B'kudei Hashem? The truth is, if you don't study what we just studied in Chassidus, it's a good question because it doesn't feel so happy. But if you understand that every halacha that you incorporate into your intellect, that you are having an intimate oneness with the wisdom and will of Hashem, it changes everything. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves that every day. If you forget that it's from Hashem, you've got big problems. He says, the leis machshava tvisa v'lei b'rtzeinu v'chamasei. And we explained already from the Zohar that no thought can grasp him, nor his will, nor his wisdom. Except you can't understand God. You can't grasp God, except there is a way to grasp God. Yet the exception to the rules when the divine wisdom and will is dressed in the rulings of Jewish law, which have been codified for us. Which right away explains a few things. Alter Rebbe doesn't say this clearly, but it's very clear. It's implicated. Number one, you often wonder why the Gemara says that a person should always learn Torah Shelo Lishmah, even without the intention of doing it for God's sake, because eventually, if you do it not for God's sake, eventually you'll do it for God's sake. Why would you tell someone to learn Torah Shelo Lishmah? What's the point? Let's say their intention is not to actually fulfill the halacha, not to fulfill the mitzvah. What's the point of just learning it? But the truth is, now we can have a better understanding. Is there really ever a time that a Jew studies Torah, assuming they're studying properly, not with a misguided? What they do afterwards is not relevant. They have to study with the proper understanding and the proper teachers and the proper guidance. But when you're studying Torah, despite whatever your intention may be, there's a divine oneness that you are having, an intimate oneness with Hashem. And that actually explains why we believe that eventually he'll come to learn Lishma with the proper intention, because how could you not? You learn Shelo Lishmah, you're learning God's wisdom, you're having an intimate union, you're going to actually fall in love with him. And then it'll be Lishma. But there's another important thing. The Gemara says, I believe it was about the second Beis Hamikdash, the second temple, that one of the reasons that the temple was destroyed, Shelo Baruch B'Torah Tchilo. Maybe it's the first Beis Hamikdash. I don't want to say which temple, but they didn't make the blessing on the Torah study before they studied. And the Rebbe addressed this many times. Like they didn't say the bracha in the morning. Asher kidishanu b'mitzvos v'tzivanu al divrei Yisrael or asher bracha b'anu mikol ha'amim. That's why they deserve to be annihilated. That's why the temple deserved to be destroyed. But the Rebbe explained this, and it's so important. It wasn't that they didn't say the bracha. Of course, they mumbled the bracha, like many Jews mumble brachas in the morning, without the proper intention, without the proper understanding. When we say in the morning, "Sha'asali kol tzarki," you've made for me all that I need. Or "Amechi mitzadei gaver," that God has created the steps in which I'm going to walk. Or "Pekei achivrim," that you open my eyes, not just literally, But figuratively, we have to mean it. They said Birchas HaTorah, they said the blessing, but they didn't recognize that the Torah is not just a wisdom that God commanded us to encapsulate and to study, but that it is God's wisdom and will that we are studying. And when you study Torah without recognizing that, you become an egomaniac. There's no humility. Till today, there are people who study Torah and they forget what this is all about. It's not about where you're going to go with that information. If I learn enough, I can become a big rabbi. If I learn enough, I can become a Rosh Yeshiva. If I learn enough, I can become a big gadol. If I learn enough, I can get into this yeshiva. If I learn enough. That's not what it's about. It's not about whether you can argue better with another student or with your teacher, proving them that they didn't understand the Torah properly. I once heard a guy sitting in a yeshiva and he said, I don't agree with Rashi. Do you know what you're even saying, what those words mean? You could only say that if you don't recognize the divinity and the incredible holiness that exists within that blot of Gemara. So when we understand the first section of chapter 5 in Tanya, that when we learn Torah, that halacha, specifically halacha he talks about, the halacha and the Gemara, the halacha and the Shulchan Aruch, our minds are engulfed with the idea of Torah, and the idea is engulfed in our minds. It changes everything. It's a paradigm shift in how we approach Torah study. It's not about being an encyclopedia. You know, in other religions, and I see it a lot because I live in Montana, Rabbi, what do you think about Amos 3:2? I'm not a memory box. I don't know what it says in Amos 3:2. Let me take out the book of Sefer Amos, the prophet Amos, and take a look at what he says. And I'll look in the Radak, and I'll look in the Tzidus, and I'll look in the Ralbag, and I'll look in the Alshich, and I'll tell you what it means. It's not about being an encyclopedia. It's about internalizing the intimacy that exists in the study of Torah. He says, furthermore, V'gam, Sichlei Melubash B'hem, your mind becomes absorbed in them. And by the way, and this is the point, where can this happen most? In halacha, not in the study of mysticism, not in the study of Chassidus. Now, we are studying Chassidus right now, which means you need mysticism to teach you the power of learning a halacha. They need each other. But when you learn a halacha, you got to the core of the issue. When you study Chassidus, for example, you're talking about soul and heaven and the four worlds, about Tzilus, Bri, Tzir, and Asiyah, and the divine unions, and Yichud Zan, Malchus, and Yichud Avon, and Keser, and Arich, and Atik, and all these great things which we're going to discuss in Tanya. But when you're studying it, you're only grasping the superficial part of it because the essence of it is beyond our comprehension. And therefore, when you study Chassidus, the intimacy, the union that you have with the wisdom and will is not fully engulfed, because it's impossible to be fully engulfed with an idea that's incomprehensible to its fullest extent for a person with a finite brain, a human being. But when you study halacha, there's no such thing of, say, there's a part of the halacha that I can't understand. Of every part of the halacha you can understand. Every part of how you do the mitzvah you can understand. So therefore, when you study halacha, you are getting to the essence of it, which means your mind is not just comprehending and one with part of the idea, it's one with the entirety of the idea. And if it's one with the entirety of the idea, then the union that you could experience by learning a halacha is not compared to anything else on planet Earth for a human being to be able to experience, or for any creature to experience. And that's why he says these words, which is words that I think, if it wasn't so superficial, I would say that it should be on billboards in every Jewish community, but then it would just be a billboard and it would lose its touch. But these words the Alter Rebbe says here, and I want you to, if you know Hebrew, I want you to pay attention to the Hebrew, because not just the English translation, because the words are so powerful. The Alter Rebbe says, "V'hu yichud nifla she'en yichud kamoyu." This is a phenomenal merging experience of two beings. There is no other merging experience like it. Nothing remotely comparable exists in the physical world. Where you become completely one with another entity from every conceivable perspective and yet retain your own existence. Physically, it's impossible to engulf something else and at the same time to be engulfed by it. Yet when you learn Torah, that's exactly what happens. You engulf, you master the Torah, and the Torah engulfs you, the Torah captivates you. And the Rebbe calls it a yichud nifla. It's a phenomenal experience of merging. Even the ultimate union in the physical world, which is a husband and a wife, it's still two physical bodies. It's not one entity. Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, were the last couple to be one entity until they were severed from each other. But after that, they became two, husband and wife are two entities. That's why, even though it's great, you can get married, it's one of the greatest blessings in the world, there's also a thing called divorce. If you were one entity, divorce wouldn't be possible. Now, the Rebbe is saying that when a Jew sits down and learns a halacha, it is the most incredible union that exists in the physical world, in creation. And then ask, now you understand why in Judaism we talk about dvarim b'teil, about wasting time, as such a severe thing. In the rest of the world, but I live in the rest of the world. It's Tuesday afternoon, and you ask them how you're doing, the cashier in Safeway, and they go, Rabbi, I can't wait for the weekend. It's Tuesday. It's Tuesday morning, and your head's already in the weekend. What kind of life is that? Because in their world, wasting time is not even a thing. 2 days on the football, in pajamas, drinking beer on the couch. Back-to-back episodes. I did a whole weekend of back-to-back episodes of something. But when a Yid learns that every time they break away from the physical temptations, they break away from the noise, they break away from their favorite television news, the news ear infection, and you take out a Shulchan Aruch and say, I'm just going to learn halacha and get to Shulchan Aruch. At that moment, you are having a union with Hashem, an intimacy with God that doesn't exist elsewhere, even in a mitzvah, as we're going to discuss in our next class. So here's a key distinction. When you study, let's say, astronomy, you don't become one with the sun or the moon or the planets. Your mind unites with the concept of the planets, but there's a duality. There's the idea, the subject, and then there's you. You're not one. You're one with the concept. You're not one with the item being thought about. But when it comes to Torah, this is so important. When it comes to Torah, we know that it says that Istakel Be'iraisa Bara Alma. God looked into the Torah and created the world. In other words, the Torah was the blueprint of creation. So when you study Torah, you're not just becoming one with an idea, you're becoming one with the product itself. You're becoming one with the source of the entire world, which is Torah. And that's why we call it a yichud nifla. That it's a phenomenal merging experience that doesn't exist anywhere else in creation. Only when a Jew sits down to delve into learning Torah. Because remember, the Torah existed before the world was created. It says, Alpayim Shana Kadma Torah Lo'olam. So it's the blueprint. So you're not just having a union with a random idea. That idea happens to be the blueprint for all of creation. So it's the ultimate union that could ever exist. So based on the first half, in the second half, which we'll do in next class, which by the way, next week, I'm not going to be around. I'm going to be around. I'm just not going to have class. I'm going to be flying back from where Manny's going to get his aliyah, God willing, in the Rebbe's room in New York on the day morning after his Yom Haledos. But the next class will discuss why Mitzvos doesn't have this thing that Torah has. But to understand why every minute of Torah study is so valuable. So you got to take care of your family. You got to be a nice person. You got to be a good neighbor. It's all part of Judaism. You got to do all the mitzvahs and all the minhagim, the customs. But there is nothing on earth, it doesn't exist, than opening up a Gemara or opening up a Shulchan Aruch and spending whatever time uninterrupted, with no distractions, allowing your mind to engulf the idea, to master it, to analyze it, and eventually be engulfed by it, that is a yichud nifla, a union that does not exist and can never exist in any other part of creation. So let that be an inspiration as we move forward in this journey of becoming a healthier Jew, a more spiritual Jew. I should mention, let this be an inspiration to focus on Torah study. I want to leave you with a short idea. Chavi and I, with Manny and Chaya, hiked to the M Trail in Bozeman on Sunday. For those that don't know, I think it's 3.5 miles round trip. You gain about 750 feet elevation to about 6,000 feet. It's not the craziest hike. There's 3 options: the middle way, the easy way. We did the easy way, and there's the crazy way for the experts that go straight up. But as we were coming down, we realized that on the easy path, we saw a sign that said, towards the end, towards the top, there was a sign that said shortcut. Now, what do you normally translate shortcut? It's going to be easier. But as we were going up, Chaya and I, and Chavi and Many were ahead, and Chaya and I were halfway through the shortcut. I said, I don't remember the M being this crazy. It didn't. Last time I was way more out. I was not working out. It should be easier this time, and it feels 1,000 times harder. I don't remember it being so hard. So on the way down, we didn't go with the shortcut. We went the regular way. I'm like, oh, this is the way I remember. Turns out the shortcut is shorter in distance, but it switchbacks with crazy elevation versus the non-short way. And then I remember the beginning of Tanya, I said to Chavi on the hike, I said, no, is this not a good example of derech haruka, ktsara, derech ktsara varuka? Everyone's looking for a shortcut, except the shortcuts don't necessarily, for 5 seconds you feel like you're on a shortcut, but it ends up being so much harder. The Alter Rebbe says, no, it's not going to be a shortcut. It's going to be a long journey, but at the end it will be shorter because it's a path that's actually sustainable. It's a journey that's actually can be internalized and sustained for long term. And so as we continue in this journey, we take these tidbits of the Alter Rebbe and we allow it to guide us to actually make incremental changes in our life that will make us a healthier Jew, a more spiritual person, and actually feel our relationship with Hashem. Wishing you a wonderful Shabbos and a good Chodesh, and we'll see you back at the next class. I'm going to end the recording. Stop recording.